of membership with Good Business Colorado. Good Business Colorado is a statewide nonpartisan business association of over 230 values-driven business owners who are committed to a prosperous, equitable, and sustainable Colorado. Our members know that they have a role in shaping public policy that impacts our communities and businesses. We challenge the lines of partisanship and lead with our values. Today, we'll be joined by Pat Teagarden and Daniel Chase with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. But before we kick off today's Q&A session, I wanted to take just a quick moment to send a huge thank you to all of our amazing co-sponsors for today's Q&A session. Those being Adelante Community Development, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, the Colorado LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, Center for Community Wealth Building, Greeley Creative District, Latino Chamber of Commerce of Pueblo, and the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center and SistaBiz Global Network. Thank you very much to each of you for helping out with this. So after today's Q&A session, you will receive a feedback form with more information asking for your feedback on your experience with the event, and it'll also contain additional information about each of our co-sponsors. But for now, what we'll do is go ahead and pass it over to Lindsay Vagoda with Small Business Majority.
Thanks, Jordan. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Small Business Majority is. We are a small business education and advocacy organization, and we are run and founded by small business owners. We've been in business since 2005. We're a national organization with 6 offices in DC, California, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, and Virginia. And we really focus on issues of top importance to small businesses, those with under 100 employees and self-employed. That includes access to capital, healthcare, retirement, entrepreneurship, taxes, and more. We back all this up by extensive research and polling. And you can check out our resource hub located at venturize.org, which brings resources, especially COVID-related resources, and education to small business owners who need it. And from there, I will pass it on to Tyler.
Hi, I'm Tyler Jekyll. I'm the Director of Policy and Research with the Bell Policy Center, and we're a research and advocacy organization really focused on economic opportunity for all Coloradans. And our issues really have ranged on everything from the future of work to early childhood education, aging Colorado, as well as right now really trying to digest a lot of what's occurring at both the federal and local level related to the COVID-19 response. So I just want to highlight, if you ever want to go to our website, which is bellpolicy.org, we've created a list of resources that outline a lot of what's occurring both statewide, as well as a breakdown of many things going on at the federal level.
Great, thanks so much, Tyler. So I'm going to introduce myself right now too, and then we're going to jump right in. My name is Karen Moldovan, and I'm the Director of Policy at Good Business Colorado. So I get to work with Jordan and a lot of other folks that have joined us today. And we are just thrilled that folks were able to log on such a cold and snowy day to do some question and answer and discussion with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. So we're joined by Patrick Teagarden, who's the Director of Policy and Legislation. I'll probably use the acronym CDLE. He has been in this role since 2011. He's an attorney. He has held former positions with Congressman Tim Wirth. He was also the VP of Government Affairs for the Denver Chamber of Commerce and the Policy Director for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So when I was looking at his bio, I just thought all of those roles are really helpful, that expertise and guiding sort of where we're at in this public health crisis and what it means for labor and employment issues. And then Patrick is also joined by Daniel Chase, who has dual roles with the Department of Labor and Employment. He is the Chief of Staff for the Executive Director of the Department, Joe Barella, and he's also a Senior Policy and Legislative Deputy. So the way this structure is going to work, Patrick and Daniel are just we're going to kick it over to them. They're going to give a brief overview of the issues that we know are on a lot of business owners' minds: unemployment insurance, the process, working with the state on that, giving your employees, accurate and timely information, expansions for unemployment insurance that have recently happened. We'll also talk a little bit about the Colorado Workshare program, which may be a resource for some of you, as well as emergency rules that we've seen that do intersect with human resources right now for employers and employees. So they're going to both give a brief overview, and then we're going to really use this chat box. So folks should be able to see that. What we'll do is if you could just type in your questions and answers, and then myself, Tyler, and Hunter from Small Business Majority are going to moderate the chat box. So hopefully most of the session will be Q&A, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Pat and Daniel to kick us off.
Thanks, Karen. And thanks to everybody for joining us. I'm Pat Teagarden, the old person who is also the poorly dressed person. The younger one, Daniel, who'll be on in a moment, is also the person who knows, I'm actually incredulous with regard to how much expertise Daniel has picked up over the course of this pandemic crisis with regard to the specifics of the unemployment insurance program and various questions. So having him on board to help with answering questions going down the road is huge. I like to tell people on a regular day, even before the crisis began, Daniel knows what he's talking about, and I try to pretend I do. That's particularly true with regard to unemployment insurance issues that we're dealing with right now. I will give you some quick background. First of all, talking with Karen and others to prepare for this. Obviously, the Department of Labor and Employment is a broad overview. I think a number of you have probably worked with us in a variety of fashions. In addition to unemployment insurance, we also have our workers' comp division, which, well, workers' compensation, as you all probably know, as small business people, workers' compensation is privately provided. Nonetheless, we administer the government enforcement and regulatory overlay for that program. We've also got a division of employment and training, which does workforce development and training in close conjunction with our Colorado Workforce Development Council. And then we have it's typically in many states and jurisdictions considered the wage and hour division. Ours is called the Division of Labor Standards and Statistics, which is where wage and hour and general labor law issues are addressed. And then in addition to that, we also have an oil and public safety division, which handles, believe it or not, petroleum storage tank issues, overall regulation of safety for amusement rides, for explosives. I call it everything but the kitchen sink. And there's great anecdotes as to how those various bits and pieces somehow got under our purview as well over the years. And then finally, most recently, we took over from the division we took over the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, which deals with exactly that, vocational rehabilitation for persons with disabilities. That was for many years in the Department of Human Services, and for a variety of reasons, including Employment First as the option for persons with disabilities, was moved over to the Department of Labor and Employment. All of which is to say, if questions come up on any of those as we go through the session, we'd certainly be happy to entertain them, but figured as much as anything, it was unemployment insurance and access to our benefits, as well as access to the newly passed federal package of benefits, which would be of most interest to you and your membership and all the participants today. I can tell you, finishing up, just in terms of opening remarks, and before I turn it over to Daniel and turn it over to questions and answers, I have never been, I've spent, to Karen's point, I'm old and I've been in and out of public service over most of my career, and I've never been prouder of a group of colleagues than I have been of watching the way our divisions, particularly the folks who are on the front lines, which is unemployment insurance and also our wage and hour division, have stepped up to the plate in terms of dealing with this crisis. We've had more than 250,000, I think, applications. Daniel can correct me on these numbers if I'm wrong, and that's over the period since the COVID-19 crisis began. And we are just on. I don't want to steal the formal release, but tomorrow we will be making an announcement that we're about to stand up a brand new parallel system to handle administration and disbursement of all the federal benefits, including the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, PUA, which is an unfortunate acronym, but PUA is is the acronym, and then also the additional $600 per week per individual for either, regardless of which unemployment insurance you qualify for, which was provided under the Federal CARES Act as well. That's going to be up and running hopefully very early next week. We'll have the formal announcement tomorrow when we know for certain when that will be up and running and when we can tell people they can begin to apply for the federal benefits. I think, those are the pieces. I want to thank all of you for the fact that you've also had a lot of patience with us as we've dealt with this unprecedented influx of unemployment insurance claims. It's been both, heart-wrenching and also professionally challenging, burning the candle at both ends to try and get this up and running. Knock on wood, I think we're in pretty good shape. The state system is working, and we're about to bring the federal system online. And with that, I'll just shut up, turn it over to Daniel if you have any other comments or corrections to what I said that you might want to make, and then we can jump into questions and answers.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And no corrections on that. I do want to add a little bit more context just from the data that we're releasing today in a press release this morning. So yeah, Pat's right. We're just at around 250,000 total claims. Last week alone, we saw 105,000 claims enter our system just from last week. And just to give a little context, before any of this happened, we were at about 2,000 claims per week. And during the Great Recession, we were at our height, 7,000 claims per week. So it's a significant increase on top of that. The other data point to keep in mind is that last week we made $61 million payments in benefits, which is the most we've probably ever made in a week. And that's only slated to go up. And that really shows that most people are getting through our system and getting those payments to them. I think we're still at an average of about 14 days from claim filed to first payment. So things are working. Our system's online, and Pat's right. As soon as we get the next system online, we're going to be ready to go.
So with that, Karen, how do you want to handle questions? And we'll just go from there.
Awesome. Thank you to you both. So we're already getting a lot of questions in the chat box. So we'll just kind of popcorn. Myself and then Tyler and Hunter are going to go through and ask them. And either Pat or Daniel, whoever you think is best suited to answer, just feel free to jump in. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions about the Workshare program. I saw a few folks saying they weren't familiar with it, so I thought Workshare and UI, I think that's where most of the questions are coming in. But I did want to get a sense of what the timeline is looking like for the Workshare program. There was a comment from somebody who had applied both via mail and email, but haven't heard back yet. So just what the timeline for that is looking like, certainly understanding that this is an unprecedented level of influx and interest and need for these programs. And do you have a recommended way, would you say, to apply via mail or email for a Workshare program?
To the extent we're doing unemployment insurance questions, I want to just defer to Daniel to take these on, and I'll jump in if there's anything more I need to add for any reason.
Yeah, so a little background around the Workshare program. The Workshare program is one that's run through our UI division, which essentially a business can enter into an agreement with the Department of Labor and Employment that would allow you as the employer to reduce hours across your employees. And then those hours that are reduced, once they get to a certain level, the Colorado Department of Labor unemployment insurance can actually take up the cost of part of that labor. So for example, if you have 5 people, you could reduce 5 of them down to, let's say, 20 hours. You reduce them down 20 hours, you pay for that 20 hours, we then pick up the rest to cover them as a full-time employee. What that does is that allows you to reduce costs across your labor. It allows you to keep on those employees who are more senior or more experienced with your work, and then you can keep those people on. And that also is a win for us because we actually reduce the amount of overall trust fund expenditures that we make, seeing as the other option might be that they are fully unemployed and we take on that whole cost. In terms of timeline, we're looking at about a 7-day turnaround right now, I believe. Best way, email or phone. The phone number for that side is going to be 303-318-9100. Again, that's 9100. And if that, I haven't heard of issues on that phone line specifically, but if, of course, if you're seeing a longer delay than that, you can always give Pat or I a holler and we'll look into it on our end.
Thank you. Do you mind repeating that phone number just one more time? Because a couple of folks have commented in that they haven't heard about their status of it. So if you could just give the phone number one more time.
Sure. That's 303-318-9100. And that's the employer side of our UI division.
Great.
And the applicant one, just to add into that, is 9,000. Isn't that correct, Daniel?
Yep.
So if it's somebody who is applying for basic unemployment insurance claim and they're wondering where their claim is, it's 318-9000, and that is the one that has been notoriously backed up and overloaded with calls of late. But those are the two numbers.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn the next question over to Tyler.
Sure, and I'm going to stick to Workshare so then we can maybe follow up more in depth on UI as kind of a separate part. But there are a lot of questions about kind of what does the payment look like? And so one, just how much, when you said that split that CDLE provides, what does that look like? And then additional questions about does that $600 that's now included at the federal level apply to Workshare as well? So just, I think, more details about what does the payment from CDLE for that covered employee look like?
Sure. I'll give a couple more details too around the federal side, but the general payment without the federal benefits involved, we take 55% of an employer or an employee's average weekly wage. And we do 55% of that, and that's their benefit. We then would take the hours that we're covering, so we're not covering the full employees, so they wouldn't be getting the full benefit. We would take the hours that we cover, and that would be their payment. I did actually find out just yesterday, so good timeliness on that, Tyler, that the $600 does apply to Workshare employees. That would be paid out through that. The other thing to keep in mind is that the federal government is covering about 50% of Workshare costs for the state, which is another benefit for us as well.
Okay, so I'll turn over to Hunter if you have an additional question.
Sure. So pivoting back to UI a little bit. So a lot of folks that we work, I think collectively that we work with are either have multiple jobs or multiple gigs. So I'm seeing one question here, and I think it would kind of apply across the board. This person is a musician. They have a job where they get a W-2, and they've applied for unemployment for that piece. And then the rest of their income comes from a 1099 or gig work as a musician. Can they apply for that as well? And how does that work given that this person's already applied for unemployment with the W-2?
Sure. So a few things to note about the new federal system. So the federal system expands eligibility out to people like independent contractors, gig workers, those folks who are not normally eligible under UI. So one of the central premises of the new federal benefits are that you can't be eligible under regular unemployment insurance in any way. So the person that you're talking about, they've got a W-2 employment on file. So if they have enough wages from that job that we can pull from for a regular benefit, they would apply under the regular benefit. Now, we cannot, under regular unemployment insurance, use 1099 or gig wages. It's not allowable under the state law. So we would only be pulling from their W-2.
Could I jump in and just add a little bit more on that? Because this is such an issue. I have to smile as I'm looking at the at the folks. I mean, I see Karen and I see Tyler and I see Hunter, and I think to myself, Scott Wasserman and Deborah Brown, because we've had these conversations at the legislature for quite some time on the issues of portable benefits, particularly for independent contractors and gig workers. And while this is not directly relevant to the federal benefit eligibility, two things. Number one, as Daniel just said, gig workers, independent contractors are eligible under the federal program, under PUA. But second, and apart from that, is that that's a really long-term policy issue that I know Good Business and Bell and others have been involved in over time, and that will continue at the legislature, hopefully after we come out of this particular crisis. So I just toss that out as a placeholder.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. So we've had a couple questions from employers asking, will a claim due to COVID affect the employer's unemployment insurance rate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've heard that a lot. Right at the beginning of this, we actually went ahead and through emergency rule began to socialize all the costs of COVID-related unemployment. So what that means is instead of charging employers' direct account, we charge the fund as a whole, and it does not impact the employer's rating.
And just related to that too, and traditionally you've had the notification period that occurs very quickly to the employer so that they may comment on a particular claim. And I know that was a part of your executive order. So could you just explain kind of why that's not occurring right now and kind of just what's changed?
Sure. Do you mean the mailing period, I imagine, with the employer?
It's just, yeah, the notification and comment, right? Whenever they
There's
get
a couple of different pieces here, and I'm sorry to jump in on Daniel, but there are a couple of different pieces here. One is we waived right up front, and this went through the governor's executive order and the emergency rule that Daniel referenced, right on the front end, in addition to making sure that the costs were socialized so that individual employers didn't have their accounts penalized specific to their layoffs. The other thing we did was we eliminated the traditional 1 week waiting period, which may be what you're referring to. And that was, there's a 1 week delay from the time you stop work until the time you're eligible for benefits. We got rid of that. The second piece, to your point, Tyler, with regard to the opportunity for an employer to respond with regard to any contest they might want to put forward relative to unemployment insurance benefits, that's just not relevant under the current crisis. I mean, they may or may not get that back to us at some point in time, and we'll deal with that down the road.
Perfect. So I think this question's kind of come up in a couple forms, but and I think it's a relatively straightforward answer, but just so we're clear, if folks are experiencing declines in revenue, reduced hours, or essentially if they're still in operation, but a far greater capacity or even a slightly greater capacity, how does that work with unemployment?
Yeah, so I think what you're asking is if I'm an employee and I've had my hours reduced, but I'm still working, do I qualify for unemployment? And the answer is yes. You would qualify under normal unemployment in that circumstance. You have to have your hours reduced below 32 hours. That's when unemployment can start kicking in. If you're still working above that 32 hours, unemployment wouldn't be the right source for that.
As just a quick follow-up to, particularly for the self-employed segment, if they're, I know, for instance, we work with a number of childcare providers that may have available slots or where just their income has been reduced and they're self-employed. Does that apply as well?
Yeah, that's one that I would say will apply. I can't say for sure yet until we get that system up and running now. Perfect.
Thank you.
So this is sort of following up on that question, and you might not have the answer yet, but it sounds like you said that the application process for independent contractors will be opening up Monday. Folks are asking if you can sort of describe the application process and what they need to be ready to go on Monday in terms of, what they'll need to provide for documentation, when they should apply, the best way to apply, how they can be prepared for when unemployment insurance is opened up for independent contractors due to the CARES Act mandate.
Yeah, so just so you know, what we're saying is we're announcing tomorrow the exact timeline. I want to be clear, we don't have that exact date yet, but it should be very early next week is what we're hoping, assuming all goes well tonight. In terms of the application process, what you can expect is under normal unemployment insurance, we have to look at your previous wages to determine a base benefit. So make sure that you have, tax returns, 1099s, anything like that that will show us your wages for the last year and kind of have proof of that. That's going to be the major thing that you're probably going to need to look for us.
So I know this has come up a couple times in different aspects, but there's a lot of smaller business owners that may take an income from their business. Are they eligible for unemployment insurance under this circumstance? And then two, how does that interact with the payroll, the PPP program, gosh, I'm forgetting my acronym right now, but can you take both in that circumstance?
Yeah, so the one thing that I know about the PPP program is that you cannot double dip between PPP and unemployment. So those are two mutually exclusive at that point. So you take one or the other depending on what's right for your business. Your question about somebody who maybe owns their own business, takes payroll from that, there are two different opportunities for them under unemployment. Number one is maybe as the business owner, they've opted into the unemployment insurance trust fund and are paying premiums on their own wages before this. If that's the case, they can file right now for regular unemployment insurance and go through that process. Those that own their own business but were not paying into it for themselves, they could qualify under the pandemic unemployment, the federal program.
And I guess just related, this just popped up. If people on WorkShare, can they use the PPP program to pay payroll as well?
I doubt it. Like I said, with the PPP, it's mutually exclusive, one or the other.
So sort of along the lines of the federal UI benefit, some of those checks are going to be post-dated, and we had a question about when they're going to be retroactively filed for.
Sure. So there's two parts to that. The first one is just the regular pandemic unemployment assistance that you have your base wage that we determine. That we can backdate as far back as February 2nd, depending on when you were unemployed. So we can backdate that far. For the $600 additional in benefits, that one we can only backdate to March 29th if you were unemployed at that time.
Perfect.
All right, so switching gears just a little bit, a lot of great questions coming up in the chat box. Thank you, everybody. Keep them coming. Be patient with us. We'll get through as many as we can. So we had an employer who said in the past when an employee has separated, the employer was always contacted by CDLE to confirm that someone was laid off versus quitting, but they haven't gotten any calls at all since this has happened. So wanting to know, has this step changed, and is that something that should still be happening?
Yeah, so we are still contacting people. Generally, it's by mail right now, but we are trying to get benefits out the door quickly. So we are paying out benefits to people who file, and then we're going to come in on the back end to look at those that maybe did not qualify for unemployment. Those we'll deal with on the back end.
So we talked a little bit about independent contractors, but I know there's a lot more people that were expanded in the federal regulation. Can you just talk a little bit about other groups that were included? And there's a specific question about someone who is on work study from a university and whether that they now qualify.
Yeah, so you hit it right with independent contractors, gig workers. Another big group that just got extended out through the CARES Act is what we call exhaustees. So people who have exhausted their unemployment benefits to this point. And that includes people that maybe we don't have wages to pull from, would be included in that. I've also seen in the guidance that, if you were expecting a job that was not, that did not come to fruition because of the COVID virus, you could qualify under the pandemic. That might get to some of those work study folks that had work study and might be transitioning to a new job, but unfortunately weren't able to. Those folks would qualify. There's a few more that I don't have off the top of my head, but that will all be included in our announcement tomorrow.
So this one just popped up, and I think this is sort of interesting and relates to that double dipping piece. So if you're as an employer, you had to lay some folks off as a result of a crisis, and you're drawing on PPP to retain others, like is there an issue with hiring folks back, and how will that impact the benefit, or is that going to be considered double dipping under the programs?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you have gone past my knowledge of the PPP program. That's overseen by the Small Business Administration, not one that I can necessarily speak in that detail for.
I do think, Hunter, just adding on to that, in light of the spirit of it, it might be worth if you check with the Small Business Administration on it. I'm just willing to guess it's a matter of timing, because the issue with regard to PPP, payroll protection, whatever PPP stands for, those loans and whether you've had layoffs or not has to do with whether or not you get loan forgiveness on the other end of it.
So, and because we touched on this a bit, and I can just let folks know, particularly I think on Good Business Colorado's website, and certainly Small Business Majority, we have a number of webinars that dig in to detail on PPP, EIDL loans, and then other financing opportunities for folks. But the general thrust of what we've gotten from SBA is the spirit of the legislation is to either rehire or retain employees at relatively the same rate, with salaries capped at $100,000 a year. And I think that's going to be, I think where we've seen some kind of questions or nuances pop up is in the course of retaining or rehiring staff, do they have to be the exact same people? So I would recommend folks reference those conversations, and then we'd be happy. I believe Karen, Lindsay, and myself have been working through a lot of those questions. So if folks have additional follow-up, you can reach out to us on those programs specifically.
Yeah, thank you all. And I mean, I think as we all know, these are brand new programs and they're just rolling out. And it's so frustrating when you don't have clarity over things that you really know or need to know to run your business. But we will keep trying to, I think that's a really important question around, needing PPP to retain, while UI for some folks you just can't bring back on. So that's a question that we'll also refunnel again to the SBA and continue to ask that on everyone's behalf. We also do have another webinar on Monday that could be a place to ask that question as well, and circle back on it. But I did also want to ask just for a little bit of clarity around the federal unemployment insurance benefits. So a question around, do you have to apply separately? And is the federal UI benefit, that $600, sent separately from the state UI? So sort of how those programs are separate or being merged at the moment.
Sure. So in terms of the federal pandemic unemployment assistance, that's the separate claim filing system. That will be something you have to file separately. As an independent contractor or gig worker, you will have to file for that benefit. As for the $600, that's going to be applied through the state UI account, and that's going to be done for all current claimants without any additional steps they'll need to take. We will apply that directly, along with the backdated dates that will need to be applied.
And just to follow up on that, in terms of eligibility, are there differences that you know of, like, for example, like minimum hours that an employee has to work? Is that the same at the state level and federal level?
I'm not sure in terms of like previous work that they've had.
In terms of being able to qualify, they've been at a job, they've worked enough hours at a job to qualify.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be the same. The federal is going to be a lot more expansive than the state, for sure.
And so we've had I think it's a repeat of a similar question, and I think this was a concern that was voiced with the federal legislation, with the additional $600 for a lot of individuals, unemployment insurance might be more than they're making part-time. And so can you explain how individuals would be eligible for unemployment if they are currently employed, or how an employer can make sure to maintain employees that may be needed, especially essential workers during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I can at least touch on the first one in terms of making sure that people qualify for unemployment, those kind of things. The central tenet is still the same, so you have to, lose your work through no fault of your own. We will likely include things like, I didn't want to stay at work because I have maybe a family member at home that's at higher risk, and so I didn't want to be at work for that reason. That could qualify under no fault of your own. So just to be very clear and open about that may cause some issues in terms of those kind of workers. Now, in terms of what we're doing to make sure that those essential, functions are being fulfilled by workers, we're keeping in touch very closely with Department of Regulatory agencies and a few others to make sure that those qualifications and things remain as open and flexible as possible to make sure we still have a workforce there.
So this one's sort of a multi-part question, so I'll try and piecemeal it the best I can. So small business owners who opened their business, started operations within the past 12 months, are there lost earnings calculations prorated? And are there other considerations they should be aware of in terms of qualifying for either state or federal benefits?
Yeah, so that's going to go back to what I'd mentioned earlier in terms of whether or not they were paying into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. So if they were, it's the state. If they were not, it's going to be the federal side. We'll look at their wages for a full year. So right now, at least in regular unemployment, I can speak to that. We're looking at wages from January through December of 2019. We take all the wages, we combine them into a weekly wage, and then 55% of that. So their lost earnings, depending on how we look at that, will be included in that. So.
And sort of as a follow-up to that, and I know this is a position or something I've heard not just on this webinar, but kind of across the board for folks that are currently in the startup phases of their business, and they either had, let's just say, a job lined up or contracts that were in the process of being finalized that would, particularly in the startup space where that would pretty severely impact how their earnings are calculated. How should they go about doing that? And would any of those apply when filing your income levels?
So that's probably one that I'm not ready to answer yet, since we don't have the application website actually online. Some of it could be where I know we're looking at self-certification and other things to look at those, but until we get that website online where we can show you exactly what we're taking into account, I don't think I'm quite ready for that one yet.
Cool.
So a follow-up question about the website and when it will be launched. Will people be able to apply, this is kind of a two-part question, so stick with me, for the federal UI benefits through the state CDLE website, or do they need to go somewhere else? And then sort of a related question, are there industries that are not eligible due to sort of like sector specific considerations with like the cannabis industry for both state and federal?
Yeah, so let's start with the first one, which is the website. Yeah, that's going to be through coloradoui.gov. We're going to post that. It's going to be a separate filing system, just like all of ours are, so it won't be exactly on that website, but it will be through the state system. That's all state administered. The way that's working is that we are paying out the benefits through state monies, and then every day we're going back to the federal government for reimbursement. So all of that is handled through the state. In terms of sectors that might be ineligible, I know in terms of the state side, all industries are considered in that. Federal, I haven't seen any kind of disqualification for industries that aren't legally under the federal law.
Okay, great. And just to repeat that website, coloradoui.gov. Is that correct?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we had some questions about the implications of unemployment insurance on many different both qualifications for other programs as well as taxes. So not that you have to give every particular circumstance, but I know there's some areas where UI does and doesn't count, and then just the tax issue overall.
Yeah, so I'm assuming you mean in terms of what benefits does UI affect in terms of?
So would it affect like my ability to apply for health insurance in particular, or for SNAP or other things as well?
Yeah, so we have heard that both SNAP and TANF are taking the full UI into account in terms of that is so that includes the $600 per week, that they will take that into account. I just found out yesterday that Medicaid is exempt from taking that $600 into account. So they will only take that first benefit, that initial weekly benefit into account. So that'll help a lot there. And then in terms of health insurance, that's one I haven't looked too deeply into, but my guess is it's similar to Medicaid on that.
The one thing I will say on the health insurance, just to add to that, is that the question that came up early on, if someone furloughs if an employer furloughs people, lays them off, but continues to pay their health insurance benefits, does that disqualify them for unemployment insurance? And the answer is no. You can maintain your employer health insurance benefit and still be qualified for UI.
So to change gears, and I apologize because this wasn't in the chat box, one of the folks on who emailed me, so they just had a couple questions about the sick leave portion, namely, so the state is requiring businesses to provide sick leave as a result of the crisis. I mean, what are the reasonable expectations for a person to get tested within the 4-day period? And do they get a written confirmation that it's okay to return to work, or are they just told to quarantine?
This is our Colorado HELP rule, which was put out specifically to this. It was put out early on when, in the 4-day period, it mandates for specifically defined essential workers, and I should know them all right off the top of my head. I can tell you most of the food processing and grocery industry. I know that it includes home health, nursing home, et cetera. But in any event, if you are one of those essential workers, if you have exhausted your sick leave or don't have it to begin with, then if you exhibit quote unquote flu-like symptoms and or are under order for a test awaiting results or under order for quarantine or self-isolation, then you qualify for up to 4 days of paid sick leave. It's difficult because we put this into place. It was a reach in terms of our authority, but we felt that it was better to take the risk and put it out there for purposes of encouraging frontline public-facing workers to not show up for work if they were feeling sick. And we stand by that. It was good. But on the other hand, the 4 days suddenly, with the lack of testing that's been going on and a variety of other delays that have occurred, the 4 days seems almost, I know it seems somewhat arbitrary compared to the full 14 days to work through the symptoms of the virus and or what appears to be up to 7 or possibly even more days of a waiting time to come back, time for test results to come back. Nonetheless, our order only provides for 4 days of sick leave and does not require if I heard the last part of it, there's not a required written return to work order involved with it.
Cool. And then, because that kind of interacts with the federal piece too. So, I mean, how is that a different process, or should folks just refer to federal guidance for those?
Yeah, Daniel, I don't know if you've looked into this. I will tell you the federal component is federal funding. I mean, whereas our help order was a mandate that employers whose workers fell into that particular defined category had to provide that up to 4 days of paid sick leave. The federal one is a federally funded, I think, reimbursement or tax credit. I'm not sure exactly. And that is a separate process for that paid family medical leave, which I believe goes up to about 2 weeks.
Yeah, and we had, in our previous webinar, we had questions about how can employers try and apply for exemptions. So that it does have an exemption around if it would create a hardship. And I don't know if you have more information, but what I could read from the guidance is that it's not an application. It's just you have to have your documentation and justifications ready to go, but don't know if you know any differently. So that's the question.
We'll try and get smarter on that, but right now, unfortunately, don't have more information on the federal program.
Thank you.
So this is a little bit of a follow-up question, or just around how all these programs overlay and connect together. But if a business is participating in the WorkShare program, would they still qualify and need to be in compliance with essentially like the emergency FMLA and the emergency paid sick leave?
Yeah, in terms of my side, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have to still comply with FMLA and sick leave.
In terms of my side, which is just all of it, and being a recovering attorney, yes. I mean, the requirement to comply with the help order, if that applies, is regardless of whether you're availing yourself of WorkShare or not.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just trying to gaze through if there are other things. So if other things are coming out that we haven't asked, please push them back up. But I guess the latest one is just part-time employees qualifying for state and federal benefits. Just a confirmation.
Yeah, and on our side, part-time would, assuming you're under that 32-hour threshold, you'd qualify under both the state benefit and then as well the federal $600.
See. Someone asked if we can create a seminar in Spanish.
Yeah, and we will be working on doing that in terms of unemployment insurance. I think we're trying for Monday to do a very large town hall in Spanish.
Great. Is any of your website available in Spanish currently? And if so, could somebody put that URL in the chat box from CDLE?
Yeah, let me check. I believe the whole website is. I don't think a lot of documents are that are attached to it, but the website itself, I believe, is. So we'll check that.
Yeah, and
that
to reinforce,
ColoradoUI.gov, if you go onto that site, as I recall from looking at it, it's down in the lower right-hand corner, but it's got several options for translation.
that's fantastic. I think this has been one of the bigger challenges that we've heard too, is that having to do this in multiple languages, because we're trying to figure this out as we're moving right now too. So having to structure the programs, explain them, and then having to translate them has just been a whole other task. So I think to the person who asked that, I think that's a really critical piece right there.
And following up on what Daniel said to the person who asked that question, keep an eye out for this town hall that Daniel referenced, because we were told this morning that they think they can accommodate as many as 10,000 participants, and it is going to be 100% in Spanish.
Great, thank you. That's something that Good Business Colorado, the Bell, and Small Business Majority will absolutely be promoting. So I would tell folks to keep an eye on our social media, our email, sign up for our email list so we can be sure to push out that information when it's available. Another question, and for folks, again, if we missed your question, if you don't mind recopying it and paste it, we've got about 10 minutes left and we'd love to get to as many as we can. A question around how will unemployment insurance impact or affect Social Security benefits?
So at least on our side, there's no coordination there. So we don't offset unemployment with Social Security. You'd still get the full benefit.
Thank you.
So I guess a question on connection between CDLE, or it could be unemployment insurance as well, with Peak and Connect for Help, and just getting people access to those additional resources.
Yeah, so I can tell you that we recently, I think as early as last week, if I recall, we've updated. So every unemployment insurance claimant that goes through and files a claim, they get a confirmation email from us. We've been updating that with new resources for people to make sure once I file for unemployment, what else is out there that I can file for. So we just updated that with Peak. We're working on Connect for Health as well to do that.
Let's see.
Is there anything specific that should be considered for seasonal workers, just how they may be treated differently, or different ways that they may have to present kind of longer histories of work or anything related to that?
Yeah, I think Pat's been diving into the seasonal worker thing lately, so I'll turn that one over to him to start with.
Yeah, from the point of view of workers, no, seasonal workers are qualified under this. It's the reduction in hours threshold, and with the unanticipated, particularly with ski season, is the most obvious one. Having been truncated, they are eligible for UI, so they go through the same application process. We've been looking at some other issues which aren't worth getting into here with regard to seasonal employers and required periods of time that those businesses are shut down. And we're looking into ways, if that does happen to apply to anybody, we're looking into ways to work around that so that standard penalty of having to be shut down at the end of a season for X period of weeks or days is no longer applicable during the crisis.
Sorry, I'm just trying to read this question. So this person is asking, we're finding staff who don't want to work and are getting a doctor's note that they can't work during this. Do we have to pay vacation if they are going to be out of work, but refer to our vacation policy? And if they quit, but we are needing them to work, is there work available for them? Will they still get unemployment?
So I think that first part I'll turn over to Pat, and then I can answer the unemployment side.
Say it one more time. I apologize. Say it one more time, Hunter.
So if they're this person has a business and they have doesn't, at least from this, it doesn't sound like they have any employees who have been have COVID, but they're wanting to take off work, or they're getting a doctor's note that says they can't work during the crisis. Does this business owner have to pay vacation if they're going to be out of work, or should they just refer to their vacation policy? And then the follow-up piece is if they quit and that business needs them to work, or there's work available, are they still eligible to get unemployment?
Wow, that's a tough question. With regard to the vacation one, I think it's better to toss it under the broad rubric of paid time off and default to whatever the individual employer's paid time off policy is for their employees. I think it's the best way to sort through that. There's a lot of questions that come back and forth that get fairly fact specific with regard to when vacation pay is vested and or owed, et cetera, as well as other sick time, and how fungible those are with one another. So individual policies. With regard to the other piece to it, I think that it almost sounds like the question is one of, if somebody quits because they're fearful of contracting COVID. I mean, if somebody quits their job, then theoretically they didn't lose their job due to COVID. If on the other hand, they assert that it was because of a palpable fear that they were going to contract it, then that becomes more fact specific. Anything to add to that, Daniel?
No, I agree. I mean, yeah, if they quit because of some reason around COVID, like I said, maybe they have a family member at home that's at risk that they don't want to put in jeopardy by bringing the disease home with them, that we could look at that and see that as no fault of their own.
Right.
So in that case, to sort of follow up, you would say that person should apply for UI?
Yeah.
That's the position? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for each of us to ask one more question, and then we'll turn it over to Deborah to wrap us up. So we have a question from an employer that unfortunately had to lay off employees. Her employees applied for benefits in late March, but none have received any yet. And she's just wanting to be able to let her former employees know when they can expect to receive their first payment, or how she could find out some more information about sort of the status.
Sure. I can talk a little bit about what that timeline has been looking like. So like I said, in the past, it was generally 4 to 6 weeks between filing and payment. Right now we're seeing, assuming nothing goes wrong with the claim, about 14 days to where they're going to see their first payment. So if they filed in late March, probably March 31st, what they're going to see is eventually, and this has been a bit of a logjam for us, which is they get this 4-digit PIN code, right? And they used to get that in the mail. But that wasn't working for us. The logjam got too big. So we started pushing out PIN codes through email to all unemployment claimants that needed a PIN. So we've cleared that backlog for the most part. Once they get their PIN, they can actually go into the MyUI claimant portal to then look for their first request payment day. Usually I've seen those late March ones are going to have a request payment either this Sunday coming or the Sunday before this. And they'll request 2 weeks worth of payment. They could also see we've been going in because normally we don't backdate claims. Once they're filed, that's what we use as the first day that they're unemployed. But because obviously we had some system issues, we have been backdating claims. And so when we do backdate those claims, that triggers payment automatically for those back weeks.
Thank you. So Tyler and Hunter, one more.
Sorry, I'm just trying to pick between them. I guess I'm just going to ask, are there other changes or areas that you're also considering moving forward with through executive order or other mechanisms?
Yeah, I can speak speak at least to the unemployment side. So we've already made changes to our work share system to make sure that we expand eligibility for businesses. That's in the past had some pretty strict eligibility requirements that most businesses couldn't fulfill. We've expanded that through emergency rule. On top of that, like you said, we waived a 12-day mailing period to make sure we get these claims out the door quickly. And then the 1-week waiting period for claimants to make sure that they get benefits as soon as possible. So those are all changes we've made, as well as, of course, socializing the cost for employers to help employers out, because that can be a big hit. That's not their fault, quite frankly. So we socialize those costs. And that's generally what we've done there. We're not really, to my knowledge, considering many more changes through executive order or emergency rule. I'll turn it over to Pat for the wage and hour and anything else he might have there.
No, I think that's about right. That wraps it up. We don't have any plans on new emergency orders or emergency rules at this point in time.
So I think as a final question, that I think this is pretty valuable. What are some of the common mistakes you're seeing that would delay a UI payment? And then I think just sort of to wrap things up, since most of the folks on this webinar fit in the employer category, what would information suggestions would you offer them to help support their employees right now with regards to these programs or any others?
Sure. In terms of common mistakes, there are quite a few. Unfortunately, our system's a little clunky. There's going to be things like if you have a workers' comp claim in the last 3 years, that typically requires you to call us to get that cleared up. And obviously, you can't call us right now because we're a bit tough to get a hold of. So we've actually implemented, I think today or tomorrow, we'll be putting a form online that people can fill out for that so we can clear that out. The other things we've seen, make sure you're really paying attention to your social security number as you're entering. We've seen a few times now where you applied under the wrong social accidentally, and you're trying to then log into MyUI Claimant to start requesting payment, but it's not going to let you because you're not using the right social. So make sure as you're going through, my biggest recommendation is just pay really close attention to what you're putting in there, because to fix a lot of these things requires a phone call. And that's what you want to avoid. And then the other thing too is when you're entering your direct deposit information, typically unemployment will default onto a debit card that we send you. Obviously, those have also seen their own delays. So make sure to get the right direct deposit information in there. We've seen a lot of times people miss a number or anything like that. That's gonna do a failed payment. And again, it's gonna require a phone call to us. So anything that you can avoid in terms of those just little mistakes and mishaps will help a lot. And that would be the same recommendation we'd give out to employers too, to make sure that your employees know to be very careful as they're filing through. And then employers, of course, be responsive when we send you those reason for termination or reason for separation forms. Make sure to be responsive to those.
And as basic as it sounds, I will add in also save your work on a regular basis during the application process, because we found a lot of people when the system got backed up, if they got kicked off the system, whatever the last save on their work was what they got back to.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pat and Daniel. Just to clarify, the coloradooui.gov is the website for independent contractors that'll be launching next week, because we're still getting questions about that. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us. This webinar is part of a series that we've been doing to try and best support our members and the broader small business community to have the resources to weather this storm together. You're going to receive an evaluation form shortly. We really would appreciate if you take the time to provide us with feedback, not only on this session, but we're going to ask you what some other content that would be helpful for us to provide in the next coming weeks and months to help your businesses get back on their feet. Our next one is going to be Monday on 4/20 at 3 o'clock. It's understanding tax and payroll considerations in the time of COVID. So we've got a lot of questions. That's a great continuation of this conversation. And I would again just like to thank our sponsors as well. Adelante Community Development, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, the Colorado LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, the Center for Community Wealth Building, the Greeley Creative District, the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Pueblo, Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, and the SistaBiz Global Network, in addition to Small Business Majority and the Bell Policy Center. Good Business Colorado really appreciates you joining us, and we look forward to working together with all of you to get back on our feet and get our economy rolling again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you everyone for joining today.